So I'm going to start that. Again, so warning, everything here is being recorded. So if you guys are uncomfortable with something, or we're only recording the presentation. So yeah, if you have any issues with that, please let me know in the comments. But this is for people who can't be here tonight. So again, Marshall Rosenberg, he really wanted to find ways of communicating that bring life. You know, like for him, violence was something that is coercive, something that is destructive, something that makes relationships between people harder. And so for him, he developed this technique to kind of facilitate those connections. But it's also used, so it's on the one hand, it's good just to it can be used in interpersonal contexts, just to express how you're feeling, express what you think about something, but can also be used in conflict contexts, which is kind of more what I specialize in. Oh yeah, like I forgot to actually introduce myself in the sense that my name is Josh. I'm studying conflict studies at the master's level at St. Paul University, and I'm very interested in dialogue in general and in conflict resolution. And a big part of that is having different techniques that help us yeah, just kind of engage with each other, find out what's really at stake, find out what it is that we're really fighting over. Where do we feel like our needs are being threatened? Do we feel like there's a scarcity of resources, of attention, of different things? So yeah, like all those factors are very interesting to me, and this is something that helps us to yeah, to kind of resolve that. So again, why nonviolent? Again, because there's this paradigm where, especially back then in the 60s, that's kind of continued to today, where violence was no longer seen as something that was physical. The physical element of violence, we call it direct violence. And so there are other kinds of violence that could be manipulative, abusive, coercive, exploitative. And we can use language in ways that are all of those things. And so for Marshall Rosenberg, he wanted to talk about ways we can use language differently. So that's why he uses the word violent. I know some people don't really like that word, and other options that people have kind of come up with is like compassionate communication. Some people say a language of life, non-coercive language. I don't know how to spell that, which is okay, but I don't even know if the word non-coercive, but yeah, so these are all just different ways of talking about it, and like whatever way is kind of comfortable for you, that's okay. But a lot of people use it as call it nonviolent communication, shortened to NVC. So tonight we'll be using that term, and so we'll be talking about what NVC is about. So number one, it's a technique. It's broken down into 4 steps, which we'll be talking about in a minute. And it's a way to express yourself. So it's about expressing your emotions and your needs in a context in a way that is not coercive to the other person, that's not manipulative. So that's the primary use of nonviolent communication. So how can you, like something's not right, something's not ideal in yourself, and you're finding a way to communicate it that does not step all over the other person. So that's kind of the first part of the technique, but we can also use it to try to understand other people. And that's actually the component that I'm almost more interested in, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. But nonviolent communication is also a mindset. So in a lot of, when you start reading, there's a lot of blogs, there's a whole community about nonviolent communication. So when it's a community, it comes with its own set of values. And those values are not just like the non-coercion, like all these different things, but it's also about taking responsibility for your emotions. So not blaming other people for what you're feeling. It's about trying to eliminate shoulds from your language. So should. So it's about framing things so it's not like obligations, like pressures on yourself from outside, but it's like, what are my desires from inside? So it's like, about framing things so it's not like, so your duties aren't like manipulations coming from the outside, but it's something that comes from inside you that you're choosing freely. So it's also about freedom. So Clark was writing something in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, also there can, and this is something that can be controversial for people within the NVC community. Sometimes there's less of a focus on right and wrong. And more of a focus on like, what is it that people need? And so conflict can be framed not as like a battle between good and evil, but as what happens when people's needs aren't met, and how can we find ways to meet various needs in this context. That can be something that's controversial for people who have a different idea, like of like, for some people, like right and wrong is really important, justice is really important, working towards something is really important. And so nonviolent communication can kind of sometimes seem relativistic, like all that matters is how we feel, there's no truth. And like for some people within that community, that's the way that they, like, that's their framework. But I would also say that if you have a different kind of framework and a different worldview, nonviolent communication is still a useful technique, even if you don't subscribe to those values. So again, they are trying to take the focus on like what's objectively right and wrong, and instead focus on what's triggering you at this moment. Again, trying to eliminate should from the vocabulary, in the sense that it's not like I do this because I should, but I do this because I have this need, because I do this because I'm choosing to do this. So again, it's taking because sometimes when you say I'm doing something because I should or because I have a duty, it's kind of taking the responsibility off yourself. So by saying should, you're removing responsibility and saying I'm doing this because somebody else told me to. And so again, the nonviolent communication paradigm is about taking responsibility for our choices. So again, it doesn't mean that right and wrong in this paradigm don't exist, but it means that the focus is more on what's influencing me. How am I influencing other people in positive or perhaps negative ways, depending on how we frame that. So that's kind of the background to that. So again, in terms of what it is, this comes from a presentation that's, so there's lots of videos and presentations out there. So I took from one presentation, and it was really well written out, and I can include that original presentation in the follow-up email. So a lot of these words are not my own, but I took and adapted, and they're in the public domain. So a way of dealing with conflict without the use of force, discipline, or punishment. Constructive rather than destructive, which is kind of going to what Park said in his comment. Non-judgmental and non-blaming, considers the needs of self and others, and encourages empathy and cooperation. So this is what nonviolent communication is striving for. Trying to create a paradigm or a world where this is what communication is about. Not about like guilting somebody into doing something, but like asking something of other people in a way that gives them agency and freedom and life. So it can sometimes seem like it's passive, like it's turning the other cheek, or that it's a laissez-faire attitude. A lot of nonviolent communication supporters say, no, that's not it. That's not it at all. But some people, they do use it like that, you know. But we don't have to do that. Like it can be a sign of strength rather than a sign of compromise. And we'll be learning a bit about what that means. So, any questions up until this point? So we have some. Will be a laissez-faire attitude. Laissez-faire is a French word that means like just kind of whatever. Like as it comes, it comes. Like it doesn't matter this, it doesn't matter that. Just kind of like what happens. Yeah, that's just how it is.
Indifference, so to speak.
Indifference. Like, yeah. Thank you, Amir. Sorry, Renata. Yes. So this is kind of the theoretical philosophical background behind this tool. Again, you can accept it. You can find inspiration from it. You can find inspiration from other things. It's all good. Now we're going to get into what the technique actually is. So there's 4 steps. Number 1 is you say, and these are all things that you say. So when you're kind of triggered, when something is not going very well and you want to say something to change the situation, these are different steps that you can take. in order to express yourself nonviolently. So first, the first thing is like, what do I observe? So to say what you observe without judgment or criticism, and we'll get into some examples of what this means. So like if my roommate is bothering me, judging would be like what the crap are you doing? Like, don't talk to me like that. That's a judgment. That's a criticism. An observation is, hey, when you said this very particular concrete thing, so just say what happened. So that's the first step, observation. The second is, what am I feeling because of what happened? So am I feeling hurt, scared, joyful, amused? So the first thing, you make an observation, this is something that happened. The second is, this is how I feel because of what happened. Third is, what need is there underneath that? So I felt hurt because I need like safety, I need security, I need order, we'll be talking more about these needs a little bit more down at the bottom, but saying like, something is important to me. And the fourth is a request. So something happened that was not ideal, that bothered you, and you're asking somebody to do something differently in order for the situation to change. So those are the 4 steps. It might sound very simple, but in the past, when I've done nonviolent communication workshops, we often have like a whole workshop just dedicated to each one of these steps, because like there's a lot to unpack in each of them, and we'll unpack them a little bit tonight. And this is probably another thing that I should have said at the start. This is like, this is a huge subject, and we're just gonna kind of scratch the surface. So really, this is more just to help you guys get an idea of what this technique is, a little bit of what it might look like, give you a taste of it in the group activity near the end, and then give you resources so that you can learn more about it. But there are literally there are groups, there are like clubs that meet every week or every month to practice this. So it's kind of like learning another language. So think of a situation that bothered you recently, this week. What happened? Like, just you can say out loud right now, what's an observation that you made about a situation that bothered you? And try to say it without judgment or without criticism. If anyone would like to share. You don't have to raise your hand, you can just speak up. You can also write it in the chat if you're more comfortable with that. For me, just as an example, sometimes, so I live in a house with a bunch of people, and on the upstairs floor where my room is, we also have a common space, and one of my roommates, her office is there, and she makes a lot of Zoom calls. So she's often like speaking, and sometimes it bothers me. So for me, an observation would be like hello, roommate. So like 2 to 3 times a day, you make a Zoom call. That would be kind of the observation. What would be the criticism or the judgment version of that?
I mean, couldn't someone interpret you counting how many Zoom calls there are a judgment as well? It's like, oh, you're counting? Like I can see that being a point of contention.
So absolutely. I think a lot of it depends on your tone as well. One thing that that Marshall Rosenberg talks about is to make things very concrete. So if you say like, you've been talking a lot, like what's a lot, So like trying to be as concrete as possible. Also, for example, if my roommate spoke 2 to 3 times, but it only annoyed me 1 time, I could say, hey, roommate, I'll call the roommate Sarah. No, not Sarah. We have a Sarah here. Maria. Okay. Like, hey, Maria, when you called, was like when you had that Zoom call earlier today, I felt something, you know what I mean? So like I just say like this is something that happened. So if you feel like it might be kind of like a triggering thing to say like numbers, then you don't have to. Again, these are like guidelines. Sometimes when people use this formula, sometimes they sound like robots. And this is kind of a big criticism of nonviolent communication in general. Like it sometimes sounds really artificial. Yeah, so we're like, just take from this like what works for you. And this is just like a format that's worked for some people. Renata said, you talk loud 4 to 3 times a day. Roommate, judgment, and criticism. Yeah, so like you talk loud, or you talk like very loud, or you talk too loud, or like you're so loud. Like these are the judgments and the criticisms that basically can trigger somebody, because when we're trying to communicate our position, it's useful to do it in a non-triggering way. And so the observation is a way to clarify what exactly happened, what was the trigger for you, without triggering the other person. That's what's being attempted here.
Sorry, could you scroll up to the 4 steps again?
Yeah. I'm going to send you guys like a link to like there's basically lots of cheat sheets also, and I'll send you a link to one a little bit later. I can even actually send it to you now if you're interested. So like there's
I just want to keep it up on a second monitor.
Okay, great, no worries. Yeah.
Because I think that like when you say like this person's having Zoom meetings 3 times a day, first thing that comes to mind is you're not giving something constructive. So like you're not offering a solution as to how else are they supposed to, like where else are they supposed to have the Zoom meetings? And
that's step 4.
Okay.
So we're getting to there. So what we're trying to do right now is say like what triggered us, how it triggered us, and what could be done differently. And so we're still at like step 1. But you're right. You're like that's where this is.
I have a question. What happens if you can't make it to step 4?
You know, again, you just do like, I think maybe we can talk about that at the end, because there's lots of caveats to this kind of approach.
Okay.
Because sometimes it doesn't always work. It doesn't always work in every situation. I just want to kind of describe the structure, and you can also test it to see what works and what doesn't work. Step 2 is so what did you feel? So there's a difficulty here sometimes in identifying feelings. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to identify feelings, especially if it's in front of somebody that either we don't trust entirely, or that we don't want to be vulnerable in front of, so it can be kind of complicated. But the focus here, again, is like trying to say, this is how something is affecting me. And so not saying, oh, this is this bad thing that you're doing, which is this moralistic impression, but like, okay, so you do this, and because of that, I feel this. And so again, it's about me taking responsibility for my reaction. I'm not saying that you wanted to do it, that you caused this, but like when this happens, this is how I respond. We have some chats. Kathleen, perfect. You've been sending some stuff. Thank you. That's the screenshot. Great. Thanks, Kathleen. So there's she took a picture and put it in the chat. We'll talk a little bit later about the actually there's another sheet here about different feelings. I don't know if you guys can see this. I don't know if it's clear, but like these are just some feelings associated with met needs, like energetic, enlivened, delighted, upbeat, mellow, open, quiet. So again, like feelings that aren't attached to judgments. And so feelings associated with unmet needs might be afraid, anxious, like hate, closeness, discomfort. So notice here, none of the feelings are like, I feel abandoned, because being abandoned is not a feeling, it's an action. It's something that somebody else does to us. So I feel sad. That's the feeling behind abandonment, or disappointed, or
nettled,
confused, nettled. Yeah. And again, like this, some of this and like a NVC material is sometimes, like, to me, it's almost like a little bit too much. Sometimes, like, it gets really kind of like on the nose. But this is like, I'll send this out later. These are just like examples to try to get a vocabulary of feelings and emotions. So again, the point here is to say something happened and it triggered a reaction inside me. And we want to say the reaction in a way that talks only about the process that's happening inside us. Because often what triggers the other person is when we talk about our inner processes in a way that blame them. And so again, we are trying to remain within the context of what's happening inside us. So when my friend, I don't know, like when my friend Maria is like doing her Zoom calls, maybe I feel frustrated, right? Maybe I feel angry. I'm gonna try not to say something like ignored or disrespected, because again, those are actions. And those are things that are assuming her intentions. So again, there's a difficulty in identifying the feeling, and there's a difficulty in stating a feeling that does not assume bad intentions of the other person. And if there was like a workshop on every single of these steps, there would be lots of exercises to practice something like this. So the next step is, what's the need behind that feeling? Because if there's something that's triggering us to the point where we're having a reaction, especially a negative reaction, it's because we have a need that's not being met. So, or at least that's how it's thought of or expressed in the NVC paradigm. So I am trying to do my work. I hear this Zoom call. I feel frustrated because I need maybe quiet, or maybe I need to get my to get my work done, and I'm afraid. Actually, also this is another thing. Like I'm afraid that I'm not going to get my work done because I have deadlines, right? Maybe I need to unwind, and all of those needs are quite different. And if I say like, oh, like Maria, like, you know, you're talking on your Zoom call and I'm really like I get really worried because it's hard for me to focus, and I need more of a quiet space to focus. So all of a sudden, when I say it in that way, it's less about, oh my gosh, you're such a, like, I don't know, you're such a douche for talking in the room. Like, it's about, oh my gosh, like I have a process that's going on inside me, and like I'm trying to deal with this, and I'm inviting you to participate in like helping me deal with this. And that's the fourth part, the request. I think it's really important to note that all of these steps can be done passive aggressively. And there's this problem within the nonviolent communication community sometimes that it gets really passive aggressive. And it's like two people that are using this, like, well, when you did this, I felt this because I need this. And it's like, well, you said this, I felt this because I need this. And it just kind of like descends into some kind of like weird, like unicorn anarchy.
Okay, Josh, I've got something to share now. So my ex-landlord loved conversing with me, but he had a very poor short-term memory. So over 2 years, basically, he would tell me the same, almost the same story every single day. And at first, it was no problem, but eventually, I just built up this feeling of apathy towards his stories, and I just didn't want to hear him say it. But he wouldn't get the idea of it, so he would just go on, and I would just try my best to go along. So, like, how would you explain that? If you
So
could explain it.
again, you can only take responsibility for your response, right? So if you're feeling apathetic, or if you're like, that means that there's some need in you that's like not being met, right? So in this NVC concept, like in this NVC paradigm, it's like your need is like your need is being violated. That's like a violent, like a violent thing where like a person is basically using you to talk, you know. And that's not necessarily something evil, you know. Like I think that we all in different cases use each other to meet their needs, because maybe he has a need that's trying to be met. Maybe he has a need for communication, for connection, and maybe he doesn't know how to meet that in any other way, right? So like maybe also sometimes, you know, it's very hard for people to think about the needs of other people while their needs are not being met, you know. And that's going to be kind of the part two of the technique when we start using this about other people. But right now we're just talking about how we communicate from ourselves. Yeah, so that's one part of that. And another thing is you can only work, like you can only take care, like you can only address yourself, right? You can't change another person. You can invite them into some kind of change, but they might not be receptive to that. And that can especially happen if there's a different context of health, of wellness, and maybe, like, especially if the other person is inflexible because their needs are not being met, maybe focusing on needs instead of like oh, he's doing this, I need to do this, like in response, like instead of focusing on this, oh, he's talking so much, oh, I'm feeling apathy, I need to get out of here, and focusing on, oh, he has a need that's not being met, I have a need that's not being met. Is there a solution that can meet both needs? So again, it's trying to go underneath the surface in that context. But some people are receptive, some people are not, right? And then it might go into needing to protect your boundaries or to set up boundaries. And that can be difficult depending on the cultural context, because some contexts are not friendly to boundaries or a certain amount of independence, for example. Rahil, I think you had a question as well.
Oh yeah, just more like, I guess kind of a bit of a rehearsal. You're saying you have to observe and then express a feeling.
Yeah.
If you're not used to it, or maybe you don't know the other person that well, that you feel comfortable to.
Yeah.
It's almost like I feel like it's part of the process. Would you have to do self-preparation, almost rehearse, like expressing and observing in the way that you're talking about in terms of the NVC steps?
Yeah. Like, yeah, and that's we'll talk about that in a moment too, because it demands a radical vulnerability. Especially in cases that might feel dangerous, and not necessarily physically dangerous, but maybe socially dangerous. Are you going to lose face? Are you going to open yourself up to attack? You know, sometimes by phrasing things in a NVC style, the other person might not expect it, and they might actually be inspired to kind of respond in a more kind of healthy way, or that I would consider healthy, right? But so it depends, right? Also, like, these are just the classic steps, but you can change them. Like, the thing that I don't like is, not that I don't like it, but it can be kind of a bit too much. Like, one of the biggest exercises is practicing, I feel this because I need this, right? And when you say that a lot, it sounds very self-centered in our culture, at least, you know, like, oh, like, are you whining? Are you this? Are you that? So like, you can just use different terms, you know, that kind of point to that same pattern or reality. So again, you can mix and match. If you find a way to communicate something similar in a different way that works for you, then good. Again, this is just kind of the theory behind why this was developed in this way. Does that make sense? Amir?
Yeah, I was going to say as well, I think Daryl's example is good because it almost reminds me of an instance where I wouldn't want to use it, because it's just, it feels like sort of melodramatic. You know, it's like, I feel like just saying, hey, you told me the story already, you know, would be almost sufficient enough. Mm-hmm. And so it almost makes you think, like, in which situations would this be appropriate and in which ones would it not be appropriate?
And that's kind of the last step of our workshop tonight, because it is like, one problem that I have, especially with NVC culture, is that some people try to use it for everything, when it's like, it's one tool in a toolbox.
Yeah, it sounds exhausting.
Like, it can be, you know. And I think when you're kind of in a, like, when you practice and when it becomes more natural, it's like, it's, you know, it does get easier. But especially when you're not used to speaking in this kind of way, it's like learning a new language, you know.
Right, because then wouldn't the other person also have to have the emotional availability to listen to your feelings? And if like, if I'm getting done after work, and then, you know, I hang out with a buddy or two, and then we're just playing games or something, and then he says to me, like, you know, the way you play this game makes me feel certain way. I'm like, dude, I just got off work, I don't want to listen to it.
But you can, but you can also kind of say that in a kind of like an NVC style, like, right. In terms of, you know what, like, I can't go there right now, you know. And it's not that, oh, you're like, it's really bad that you're telling me this, or like reacting aggressively, but like, hey, you know, I can't deal with this right now. Focusing again on the processes inside of me. And that's really what's at the core. Like, what process is happening inside of me that's causing this reaction? And how can I talk about it in a way that invites us to do things differently? And this is just a step-by-step algorithm that can work towards that. We can talk about a bit more about this, I think, near the end, because it's like, there's lots of interesting nuances. And again, people do like week-long lectures on this, you know, so we're really just scratching the surface. I'm going to send.
Sorry. What if you're conversing non-violently, but the person you're talking to perceives you as being violent? What do you do then?
Protect yourself. Sometimes, you know. Again, it depends on what you want. It depends what your goal is. If you feel like you have to talk non-violently, that's an issue. I would say this should be like this is a tool that you can use when you want it. I think there are also lots of good reasons when not to use it. Again, we'll talk about that a bit later. I just want to bring up another sheet, examples of feelings and needs. So you can, and again, this is, every culture frames needs differently, right? We have like the Maslow pyramid, we have different things. This is kind of the like Marshall Rosenberg one, where there's like needs for play, for physical well-being, for peace, connection, meaning, and there's lots of different needs within this. And like, again, this can help expand our vocabularies of like communicating, like what are our interior processes at this moment. So again, I will send these out as links into the chat a little bit later. Because, spoiler, your needs matter. And this is something I think that's also very different in different cultures, because sometimes we're told that our needs don't matter so much as our work, so much as the other person's needs, so much as the process, so much as the group's needs, so much as our family's needs, so much as our partner's needs. Also, there can be a big gender element to it. Like soldiers as men are told that like their needs don't matter because they have the duty. Sometimes women, especially in very patriarchal societies, are told that their needs don't matter so much as their husbands. Like this is a paradigm in which our needs matter, and that we have a right to express them, and we have a right to stand up for them, and we can do it in a way that isn't necessarily triggering to other people. So this is the hope. Again, it's like it doesn't always work that way in practice, but it's like a step towards this. So the fourth step is making a request and focus on the effect it will have on you. So, okay, Maria, you know, when you're having the Zoom call, I could hear it, and I started feeling really anxious because I have a deadline, and like I need to like make the deadline, because when I don't, like I feel like shit, and I feel like I'm always catching up. Is it possible for you to let me know ahead of time when you're going to be having a talk, so I can move to another room, or maybe we can kind of switch different places, different times? So again, you're trying to phrase your request in terms of a collaborative plan. So this is something like you're giving them an opportunity to like make life better for you. And so this is like often something that's like Marshall Rosenberg says, is this a request that would allow for a more life-giving option. Some people find that language a little hokey, but the point is like, how can we collaborate together to make a change? So a classic example like that he uses in the book is, when I see dirty socks under the coffee table, I feel irritated because I need more order in the rooms that we share. Would you be willing to put your socks in the washing machine? And it's not about you need to do this, but would you be willing to, or could you, or this kind of thing. Again, like making a request. And sometimes this is also really vulnerable because you're leaving it open for them to say no, especially if you're not manipulating them or guilt tripping them. So all of this actually, so all of this is like, you're opening yourself up in a way that might feel uncomfortable, or that you might not be ready to, especially with a specific person. It can. Amir said this does sound kind of passive aggressive, and that's why I don't like using this formula as is. For me, I like the principles behind it. So again, just saying what it was, talking about your internal process, and like suggesting a collaborative solution. Like to me, that's like, and this is like a very concrete way of doing that. Yeah, and I think when it's in a, like the vulnerability can feel very like a negative or like something dangerous sometimes, but the vulnerability sometimes disarms the other person, especially if they're expecting passive aggression, if they're expecting open aggression, or if they're expecting defensiveness. Just being like, this is how it is. I'm trying to deal. Can you help me? Like sometimes you're like, whoa, okay, yes, sure. Some people might not know what your internal process is as well. So there is a space here for thoughts. Unfortunately, we need to move on. Some of us have already expressed some thoughts. If you have some thoughts, please feel free to write them into the chat, and we'll have more space for discussion a little bit after. There's specific skills to develop that makes this possible, these different steps. So separating observation from evaluation, or observation from judgment, that's like a really like key thing, because usually when we observe, we're also passing judgment. So like that's something sometimes you spend a whole workshop on, talking about those tools. And in the book, there's a chapter on each one of these that do have like exercises and stuff. So if you're interested in that, then check out the book. There's a lot of free PDFs out there too, lots of material. Again, differentiating from like feeling from thinking. So not talking about like how you evaluate something, but like how you feel about something. And again, it's like, what's my internal process? And connecting that to a need. And also sometimes we need to learn what our needs are. Maybe we only know our feelings, but we don't know the needs that are underneath them. Yeah, so Kathleen says that it depends on your communication style. Some people might feel it's direct. She also mentions narrative. It might be cool if you unpack that during the discussion, Kathleen, so we're on the same page with what you mean by that. But yeah, like different people's communicative styles. Some people are very they communicate non-verbally, you know, so this can be something that can be difficult. Again, requesting instead of demanding, and learning how to request in a collaborative way, focused on, this is something that's important to me. And then the last one is, again, emphasizing personal responsibility for our actions, for our feelings, for our internal processes, because it's easy to blame other people for our processes. I feel this way because you did this. That's not it, not according to this paradigm, and that's the thing that can trigger. Also, there's this like big psychological discourse that says that blaming other people for our processes is also kind of like a codependence, like lots of kind of like things that we frame as unhealthy. That's a whole other can of worms we don't have time to talk about tonight, but this is the NVC frame, trying not to trigger another person when talking about your needs. So again, blaming for feelings focuses on the other person. Explaining one's feelings and expressing one's needs is the focus on yourself. And again, you're taking that responsibility and saying, this is something that's happening in me. It would be really cool if we could do something differently so that this process is different. Paradigm shifts, what would change if you started speaking like this? Yeah, what would it take? Like, what change in you would it take to start talking more in this kind of language? Or what might be the obstacles to talking in this kind of language? We mentioned before passive aggression, or the suspicion of such, feeling like you're in danger. What are some other obstacles and what might change? You can either write in the chat or just say out loud. We have some people in the chat.
It sounds socially weird sometimes to talk.
Gosh. Robot speak, or just like socially uncomfortable.
There's a sense that the other person just doesn't have the capacity for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe the other person's not ready or has the capacity.
Not assuming people's intentions before actually talking with them.
Mm-hmm. So from the chat, Patty also mentions cognitive or communicative impairment. Heather mentions danger might be a biggie. Daryl also kind of shared a story. Yeah, so like a paradigm shift that would require a change might be, okay, if there's some kind of danger, what would it take for me to not feel in danger? Maybe that means separating myself. Maybe it means communicating online. Maybe it means something else, right? Maybe it means informing the other person that we feel in danger. Maybe they don't mean it, you know? If something's socially uncomfortable, if it's because like we don't know how to say it, we can practice. If it's like, you know what I mean? Or we can basically do it even though it does feel weird, you know? So like these are the different shifts that that might happen if we start talking this kind of way. And I'm not saying that we need to, I'm just saying that if we're looking to engage in situations that normally are triggering, this is something that we can do.
Josh, I was just wondering, is this work best when there's a conversation among like equals, so to speak? If there's a power relationship, employer-employee, majority-minority.
Yes. This is, yeah.
Yeah, government versus citizen, all that. How does that play out?
This is something we might unpack more at the end, because this is one of the biggest criticisms, especially when this is framed as, oh, this is the best way to deal with conflict, because not everybody is going to take your needs and your emotions seriously. And sometimes communicating them to somebody might give them fodder to use against you. Also, in abusive relationships, if you're trying to, like if there's a power dynamic, like you can be putting yourself at risk. There can also be elements of entitlement, either in relationships or like at work. The other person might feel they have power over you, so they feel like they have the right to ignore you. And so they might not take it seriously. You can try to address that directly there, in communication, but sometimes you might need a different tool. That's, for example, where mediation or facilitation comes in. Somebody else that can provide that safe space, because what you're doing basically here is you're trying to create a safe space by yourself. And that works up until a point. After that, maybe you need somebody else's help because you might be triggered in different ways. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I'll have to go a bit quicker, I think, because again, these are all like really, really, really good points. Daryl, you asked, what if the other person will take whatever you say to them personally, even if you didn't mean to say it that way? It happens. And this is where you can actually use the technique in a mirrored way. And I want to talk about in a second, that's my favorite way, actually, to use it. Also, if somebody else has interests, if somebody is going into a situation looking to manipulate you or to get something out of you or to, or just looking to have their peace, they might not be interested in your internal process. And so they won't be moved by that. That's, again, when you would not use this technique, but use a different one. Use this technique in contexts where there's some kind of good faith, where there's some kind of connection, where you exposing or sharing your internal process might de-escalate the situation because you're humanizing yourself. This is basically what it comes down to. You're humanizing yourself and you're allowing the other person to see that you're human. And sometimes in this like immovable stone situation that Amir talked about earlier, sometimes that's enough to trigger a huge shift. Because when we're polarized, it might be really hard to see the other person as human, or we might be caught up in the heat of the moment. So that kind of situation, it can be kind of dangerous, uncomfortable, but on the other hand, it could also really spark a change. And you have to figure out what it is that you need, what it is that you want out of this. Some people have enough resources to do this in a more risky situation. Some people don't. And that's also where the power dynamic comes in. If a person's like in a marginalized community or in a marginalized position, they might not have as much resources as the other person. These are all nuances, though, that like we could talk forever about. But these are elements of that. We already talked like warning vulnerability, because it does make you vulnerable. So I'm going to talk very quickly about 2 other ways to use this technique. So kind of part 2 is helping someone express their needs. So if you go back up to the 4-step process, if somebody's really frustrated, if somebody's acting out, you can try to state their internal process. So, oh, you're really upset. So like because you saw the dirty socks under the coffee table, you felt irritated because you need more order in the rooms that we share, and you'd like me to put my socks in the washing machine. And you confirm. So again, saying it like this sounds kind of robotic, but you're basically trying to elicit their feelings and their needs. And oftentimes when you say them, I say, no, it's not that, it was this. And like sometimes you have to repeat a couple of different times. Oh, okay, so was it this? Is this what you're feeling? Is that what you need? And when it's with friends or when it's in a good faith context, people sometimes really want to be seen and really want to be heard. So this is a technique that gives, like, that brings visibility to the other person. And very often, I've seen this a million times myself, when a person feels profoundly seen or profoundly listened to, there's like a physical release. There's like a, like, and sometimes you can see that moment. And that's when the conversation changes. And this is also one of these like immovable object moments where, like, if you're locking horns, you can try to step back and use the technique to try to figure out where is the other person at. They might relax, and then you can say where you're at. And then, because both people feel seen, both people feel less triggered, you can try to find a collaborative solution. It's hard to do in practice. It takes a lot of practice. But this is where, for example, there was a question earlier about what happens when the other person is triggered, or what happens when the other person is not in good faith. Sometimes using this to help the other person express their needs, sometimes that's the key. And in terms of dialogue, using this as a dialogue technique, this is where the gold is. Because you're trying to figure out what their internal process is like, make them feel visible, help them feel safe, and help elicit a positive response that you can do. So that's part 2. And again, looking for the sign of relief. If, like, they relax. It doesn't always happen, but like often it does. And if it doesn't, maybe that's a sign that this isn't the tool you need to use, because maybe there's actually some kind of external interest, something else that's happening. So the next level is using this to listen to yourself. This is in a context where you're feeling very triggered, you're feeling upset, all these different things, and you start using this as if you talk to yourself, using this language as if you're that other person. So in this context, you're trying to make yourself feel seen and visible and safe. And you're trying to generate that moment of relief inside of yourself. Because maybe when you make yourself feel seen, even if only to yourself, maybe then you'll feel a bit more calmer, you'll feel in a better place to use it for the other person. So again, when we feel like we're triggered, when we feel like something's dangerous, and if we decide we want to continue, and that we have the resources for it, we can turn it into ourselves to try to create some kind of momentum. Then we can use it with the other person. And then when that ground is cleared, we can express our needs. Again, this sounds very nice in theory, and there's lots of different caveats to this, but this is basically, that's the structure, that's the technique. And it's like not simple to put into practice. And just like any language, it takes like it takes language for it not to take, like, it takes like a long time for it not to take so much effort and not to sound robotic or artificial. But like, this is a technique that over the past 50 years has been used in therapy, in conflict mediation, like I like in like I kind of work with dialogue facilitation often, like with groups in conflict, and like sometimes like my colleagues work in like post-war contexts, and this is still one of the main tools that's used in that toolbox. So it's proved like one of the most kind of useful paradigms on a one-on-one basis, because this is also another thing. When another person's there watching, sometimes it's hard for the other person to respond, to speak about their internal process, or eliciting that internal process from them in front of somebody else can also be can make them feel more vulnerable than they want to. So again, there's lots of caveats. I just wanted to open up space for questions, for thoughts, for discussion before we move into the group work. And if you wrote something in the comments that I didn't see or bring up, then feel free to also just state it out loud.
So is the technique supposed to be used when there's some sort of either series of event or big event? Because, you know, in a post-war context, that's where I see this being used almost like really effectively.
Mm-hmm.
But in a seemingly uneventful scenario, but with similar emotional capacity, mm-hmm. would it be equally as useful?
Like, it's basically where needs are not being met, you know? Like my needs are not met and I'm acting, like I could be acting out. I could be triggered. I could be like behaving in like I could be doing something I don't want to do because like I'm triggered or because I'm not getting what I need. My tank is low, you know, my resources are low and I'm lashing out. Or I just get really frustrated because I see something, you know, that I don't like. So it can be used in like literally talking about like my roommate didn't do their dishes. In the Double Crux workshop last month, I talked about a conflict I had with a roommate over our dog because I was living in a commune and it wasn't clear whose responsibility the dog was. And half the group was like, we should just love the dog and we'll take him out for walks. Other people like, no, we need like a schedule because the dog was pissing everywhere. He was a puppy, you know, like it was getting to be like, it was for like 2 months it went on. It was a disaster. Everybody was triggered and it was so much tension. And we really like, this is where it's very difficult to do it on your own when you're so triggered. That's where a third party can really be helpful. Because I was trying to use dialogue techniques in a neutral way when I wasn't neutral. I was a party to the conflict. And that makes it difficult as well. But sometimes you don't have what you need and you have to just work with what you have. And this is like one thing you can try to see if it makes something better. So the double crux that we talked about last month is about, okay, what's the intellectual, what's the value that's behind this, right? So like, oh, like about the dog, like they think that like love is a thing, right? Or spontaneity is really important to save. And when we don't have spontaneity, things get bad. The other one's like, oh, we need a structure. And without a structure, things get bad, right? That's the intellectual side. That's the double crux. The nonviolent communication is like, oh, when I talk about my structure, like this other person might feel threatened, you know, because that spontaneity might be part of their identity. And that's when we start talking about feelings, needs, reactions. And this is where like immovable objects sometimes start to move. Not always. It really depends on delivery as well. Because we're dealing with like kind of another set of hardware.
So does there, how does humor play into NVC? So like, for instance, if the dog's pissing everywhere, there's a sort of absurdity element to it. And that's kind of, in a way, kind of funny. But does that help to diffuse tension in a way, like by addressing the sort of absurdity of the situation? And does that play into some of the 4 steps? So like, I found some of the 4 steps almost too serious.
Yeah,
in the sense that like
it's a very self-serious system. Like the book is not funny. Humor is actually a different tool. Like highlighting the absurdity is like a separate thing, another tactic that you can use. You can mix them as well, because it's like you're trying to highlight how like crazy this has gotten and like how out of control. And sometimes that also highlights your needs, you know, that highlights your internal process. Like, what the crap is happening? This is just like, how has this gotten to this point? And again, it's a way of humanizing yourself. And if you do it in a way that humanizes the other person and presents a collaborative framework, then it can help, because you can use humor as a way to delegitimize the other person.
Yeah, that's ridicule. I guess that would be what you'd call ridicule.
Yeah.
But I guess it's more like to highlight an observation. Like humor is a way to to elucidate an observation rather than
and to release tension.
Make it robotic in a sense. It's like,
this
dog is pissing everywhere and it makes me uncomfortable. Therefore, we should make a schedule, or there is a sort of a coldness to it, which I would agree with your statement on. But
like like when you do it in that process, it's robotic. For me, I try to think about the principles behind it. It's like, oh, there's a need here that's sparking an emotion that like was triggered by this thing that happened. So because I'm aware, like I'm thinking that way, I'm going to try to figure out what that need is. And I can do it using this language, but I can do it using other language. So again,
is that highlighted in the book, or is that like something your personal spin on it?
The book is more like the book. It's almost like he's a hippie, like, and it's just like this is the main thing that like will work. Just do this. But it's useful. Like there's a lot. It's worth a read, but feel free to use it in different ways. Is there anybody else who has had some thoughts or some questions as well, either here or in the chat? Okay, in that case, we can also do more discussion after after the work, after the group work. So I would like us to express frustration with something that happened this week. So imagine a frustrating situation where a need wasn't met. And you're going to share it with your partners in the groups. We might do like groups of 3 using the 4 steps, or using your own variation on the steps, but like try to use the 4 steps just to practice it, because sometimes it's easier to practice and get this down and then start to play with it. How many of us are there? I think there's 12. So 4 groups of 3. So each person is going to go once. So one person is going to be like the speaker. The other person is going to be the listener, like the person that's directed at. And the third person is going to be like an observer. So one person can express, and the other 2 can give some comments on that. And then another person gets a turn. Does that, do these instructions make sense?
Yeah, sorry, I just had one question. How did you end up solving that roommate dog issue?
We can talk about it after the
Okay, after? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, like it's very much with this kind of framework, with this kind of tool. Great. Does anybody have any questions about this? So could somebody actually, some people have been making screenshots. Could somebody make a screenshot of this and put it into the chat, because I can't copy paste it and I didn't do it before. Because
if you hit Windows button, if you're on Windows, Shift and S, it creates a rectangle for you to screenshot something and copy to your clipboard.
I can also
okay.
do
That would be great, because I don't want to have to go into my paint with like the share screen and stuff. Anyway, so I will write it down in the chat. In the meantime, also I will put down some cheat sheets. So this cheat sheet here is how you can use the NVC process. And one column, this column here, is about using it for myself. And the other one is empathically receiving. They call it empathically receiving. This is actually something I'd like us to also practice in the group. So again, one person speaks, the other person repeats. So using the same NVC language directed at the other person, and the third person observes. I think, yeah, it might be better for that. And that might take some time. So we'll give at least 20 minutes and for that. So you're going to get this sheet in the chat that gives examples. I'm also going to send the feelings paper and also the needs. So feel free to look these up while we're doing it. Thank you, Kathleen, for sharing the screenshot. Park says you can't see pics or paste pics. I'll write it down in the chat. I will just stop sharing my screen if I can. So your task, person 1, express your frustration with something that happened this week using NVC language. Person 2, pretend like that person didn't just say all of that, and repeat and try to elicit the feelings and needs behind that frustration, and then ask to confirm. And 3, give comments on the process. And when one person is done, when this whole cycle is finished, you move on to the next person, who then does the same. Is this clear, or would you like to see an example here? Like maybe something.
Josh, if you could do example, it feels like a bit of role playing. We're taking a real life example, but the other person did role playing the recipient from real life, kind of thing.
Yeah. So like my example for myself is, yeah, like Maria. So today, earlier today, there was a Zoom call, and I was there also in the room, and I was feeling really anxious because I had a deadline, and I'm just like really stressed right now, and I couldn't really focus. Do you think that maybe if and I'm going to be like working on these deadlines for the next 2 days, so could you please let me know when you're going to be having some calls, and then I can either go to another room, or maybe we can figure out some way of doing this. So that's an example of coming from one end. Maybe somebody can say a frustration, or just mention a frustration from this week, and then I can try to elicit using the mirroring technique. Would anybody like to offer their frustration on the altar of examples?
Got one.
I'll go.
Okay, Heather, go ahead.
So my colleague, I'm talking about my colleague, or to my colleague, I noticed you didn't complete X task in a certain time frame, and that created a lot of work for me at the last minute. Am I supposed to keep going?
Yeah, no, that's good. So okay, I'm really so as if I'm that colleague. I'm really sorry. So when that happened, like actually, can you say yours again? Sorry, I just spoke.
Yeah, so you didn't do part of your job in a certain time frame, and that created more work for me at the last minute.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. So like, did you did it cause a lot of problems for you? Like what happened? Like what was the consequences of that?
Yeah, it made me feel frustrated and stressed. Probably isn't a feeling. Anxious.
It can totally be a feeling. Yeah. Oh, was it that you were, and also I'm just gonna pause here. Like often it's not like a person's just like, oh, that was terrible, right? And it's like, oh, like no, that's okay. I'm not asking you to like be like a like, it's okay. But if somebody was like, oh, like, you know, like you didn't do your work, and now I have to like I had to like do all that. I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm sure you must be really frustrated because I'm sure like you have all these other things that you need to do, and you don't need one more thing. So that's a way that I'm trying to affirm her feeling and the need. So there are some communities that all know NVC. And so you can actually say, oh, were you frustrated because you needed this? And that's okay. That doesn't sound robotic. They know what the algorithm is. But if they're not, then you can just try to affirm both. So, oh, like, I'm really sorry. That must have been X, because were you trying, like, did this affect you in this way? Like the need. And you can ask to confirm. So I'll rephrase what I said. Oh, I'm really, really sorry. That must have been very frustrating because you might have had a lot of other things to do. Did this make you miss any other deadlines? That's a way of me trying to affirm, like to confirm my my evaluation. And then Heather could say,
well, no, in fact, it didn't make me miss another deadline, but I need notice and like structure with how I'm going to be spending my time at the end of the day. And this kind of like rattled me and just caused me to have a shitty evening.
oh, okay. So I'm really sorry because like I often do things on the fly. Is structure something that's really important to you?
Yes.
And like knowing this ahead of time. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm really sorry. So what can we do to like can I do this X thing? So that's kind of it. Like, and I would propose something depending on the context. So what I did is I didn't like go through the formula, but I tried to affirm certain elements of her experience and then a confirmation. And this is actually a really good example because I got it wrong. And when we're trying to elicit the other person's inner experience, we're often going to get it wrong. So it's always really good to do it in a way that that invites them to correct instead of assumes, because assumptions can also be triggering. And then when she says, no, actually it was something like this, that's often a clue to what their need is. Then I can say like, oh, here's why I didn't see that. Because I'm this kind of person. You sound like you're this kind of person. is that accurate? Does that make sense? And that's a way of clarifying again this need that they have. And they're like, actually, yes. And that might lead to a moment of like relief, like, oh, yes, you get it. They might still be frustrated, they might still be angry, but it might open up more space for dialogue, and they might assume that you're sincere when you suggest something else. So that's one example. Does that make sense? Again, this is all very new for maybe some of us, and we're just playing around with it right now. So I noticed that some of us have our screens off. If we could turn them on during group work, if we decide to do that. I'm not sure how many, some of us might actually be taking a timeout, so I'm not sure. That's also okay. So I will maybe put us in, yeah, there's 13 of us right now. So I'll put us in groups of 4. And then maybe we can work together more on, okay, back to, yeah, okay, I'll just put us into groups, and some of it will be 3, some of it will be 4. So that'll be 4 groups. Thank you for somebody for putting that in the, wow, Park, thank you. That's like, you just did a lot of my work for me. I affirm that. If you guys have any questions, feel free to, I'm gonna go between the different rooms, and I can kind of give a bit of help. I'd like us to spend, yeah, maybe 15 to 18 minutes on this, but if you finish early, send me a note. I think at least one person every group will have me on Facebook, so just send me a note and I can bring you guys back into the main hall and we can start the discussion. If you need more time, I can also try to give that, because it looks very simple, but trying to do it for long periods of time, maybe not everybody's going to get a time to practice, but we only have about half an hour left, and I don't want to take up too much time, and I'll leave the Zoom open afterwards, so if people want to continue practicing, that's also okay. So I'm going to send you guys into groups, and I'll see you on the inside.
Oh, I love that.
Hey, Christina, are you stepping this one up? Okay.
So there's
hi guys. Sorry, one moment. Because you can, if you guys want to, you can continue in a group of 2, but somebody bowed out. You can continue like this, or I can send you guys to separate groups for groups of 4. How would you prefer?
no glaze on glaze, senor.
Sorry?
I was just saying to Lisa, I'm pretty tired, so my ability to make decisions and whatnot is a little limited. So I'm easy. Okay. I'm easy either way.
Perhaps going to the group of 4. No offense, Park. I'm just thinking it'll just give us more people to bounce ideas off.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. So I will get you guys out in a second.
Okay.